Back again for part 2 of the Lightfall build crafting breakdown. If you didn't already catch part 1 of the breakdown, please go watch it. Would love for folks to engage on that. We definitely want to start conversation, make sure folks are understanding, and we can answer any questions that folks have. But we're going to go ahead and dive into part 2 because part 2 has a lot of details, which is why I separated out and want to make sure we had everything clear for folks. The other half of the blog that is super important that we didn't get a chance to go into detail last time is the mods and mod customization changes that are coming in Lightfall. These changes are coming down the pipeline because Bungie wanted to solve a number of problems, but some of the top problems that they're looking at solving are coming down the time that we're just in-game managing mods, engaging with the game, and actually not playing with it, removing the limitations that are actually creating confusion, as well as generally just wanting players to have a better experience in-game. So knowing that those are the goals from Bungie, here are the changes that are coming. First up is going to be revamped user experience design. Similar to what we talked about in part 1 of the breakdown with a loadout screen, the same treatment is going to be given to mod customizations. So in addition to being able to see all the additional information about your armor and weapon slots, now you'll be able to see on your armor specifically the different mod loadouts. Just keep in mind, all of this is still going to be tied to the Guardian rank system. So the more you play the game, more of the mod customization will be unlocked for you to play around with the added bonus of you being able to now see the perks and stats on your currently equipped weapons on that same mod customization screen. So rather than having to click back and forth between the various screens, now you'll be able to see everything all in one place, which is not only just an accessibility upgrade, but also something that's going to make your build crafting make a lot more sense, especially if you're new to build crafting or if you're trying to go for a certain setup with your fire team. One of the things to keep in mind is that as you're grinding out Guardian ranks, and again, we still don't know how much XP or how long that grind is going to take, but Bungie has said as of achieving Guardian rank 6, you will then have access to all of the mods. So again, knowing that you have to engage in the gameplay loop to some degree to at least get to Guardian rank 6 is going to be something that we all will have to do at least at the beginning of Lightfall. Getting in the weeds a little bit, there are 3 other main things that folks should keep in mind. 1, all mod energy types are being removed. So this is a really big thing that a lot of folks in the community have been asking for to be changed. But again, you no longer have to have an arc piece of armor to then have an arc mod slot. So regardless of if you have a stasis armor piece, solar armor piece, whatever, you don't have to match armor slots anymore because they're not going to have an energy type. Not only does this open up a huge amount of possibilities for folks to be able to build craft, but it also takes a bit of the exhaustion out of the whole figuring out like what can I put radiant light on or what can I put, double bomber mod on, all those different things. So it really allows the whole mod slot process being more intuitive rather than being this really big calculus problem that you always have to solve before you do any activity. The next piece is understanding that mods are now no longer going to just be given a bump in their status or given a benefit based on their archetype, but now it's going to go to their damage type. The example that Bungie gives us is rather than having hand cannon loader on and that being able to give a general boost just baseline across all hand cannons, now there's going to be different boosts to hand cannons based on the archetype. So in the example of a hand cannon, whether your hand cannon is a precision frame, an adaptive frame, or something else, you will then get a specific boost based on those damage types versus just across the board having something that benefits all hand cannons. And then lastly, something that's really going to be tangible for folks to know is that as you are grinding out the different levels and you're unlocking artifact mod slots, so again, the seasonal artifacts that we'll be getting, you will no longer actually have to socket them into your armor. They will now be passively unlocked. What this means in real time is as you're grinding the game, having fun, doing all the cool things, and you're unlocking slots on the artifact mods, rather than trying to figure out where those things are going to land, they'll now be passively added. So for instance, you say you unlock something for anti-barrier pulse rifles, rather than trying to have to figure out where you're going to put that on your armor mod slot, once you've unlocked the anti-barrier pulse rifle or whatever we're going to get in the upcoming season, you now have it unlocked automatically. So these are some big changes that are not just going to be great quality of life changes, but changes that ultimately just allow you to play the game and you don't have to think too much. Obviously, you're still going to have to think because it's build crafting, but you don't have to think too much about actually making your build the best it can be, because a lot of things in terms of unlocking mods, how the artifact's going to work, so on and so forth, actually are going to be done in a very intuitive way. That in mind, to round out all of those changes, we're also going to talk a little bit about armor charge mod changes. So again, as I mentioned before, the elemental affinity for armor mods is going away. This ultimately has a lot of impacts, but I'm going to pull out 3 of the what I believe to be biggest impacts that are going to have to everyone's gameplay, regardless of if you're a new light returning player or otherwise. So when we're talking about armor charges, specifically thinking about charge with light, you will now be able to hold between 0 and 3 stacks of charge with light, or just generally an armor charge by default. What this means is a lower barrier to entry to charge mod setups. If you want to build more deeply into charge mod setups, such as charge with light, you can, but being able to have 0 to 3 just based on your regular build that you already have set up with your armor and weapons is a huge change. Since charge mod setups are such an integral part of the game, not having to think too deeply if you don't want to, as well as the option to build deeply into charge mod setups, is a really great add-on for the whole community. Another one that I think is super important is the fact that they are shifting how some of the mod slots work in terms of where you can place them. And so specifically, they talked about stacks on stacks is going to be only available in the leg socket, powerful friends and the radiant light only in the head socket. Now, for folks who understand what this means, for stacks on stacks, that's something we can work with. The leg slot oftentimes has a lot more flexibility when you're thinking about the build that you're wanting to put together. But unfortunately, I am pretty disappointed that Powerful Friends and Radiant Light are only going to be available in the head socket. The head socket is typically where we're thinking about putting, maybe like a resilience or a recovery buff, but we're also thinking about specifically our ammo finders. Ammo finders are pretty mandatory. And so the fact that most folks probably won't have artifice armor, right? So they won't have that extra mod slot. And so they're going to have to be focusing on ammo finders. Also have to choose between that and getting a benefit potentially like Powerful Friends and Radiant Light, which again were 2 pivotal perks that a lot of folks actually had on their arms or legs, because there's usually a lot more flexibility there. And now there's actually a really huge cost to thinking about where you're going to place those things, given the fact that you have to have them in the head socket. So again, it's a really big change. I think it's going to have a really big impact. I honestly hope, again, this is just even without playing the game, they reverse it. I do hope that they reverse it, because it just doesn't even feel right just like as you're reading this. But knowing that Bungie more than likely won't change this, just get prepared for the fact that Radiant Light and Powerful Friends, which are really great for upping your mobility and upping your strength, as well as getting that charge with light buff, are now only going to be available in the head socket. So it is going to be a pretty big trade-off between those and your ammo finders. And the last of the 3 that I want to pull out, again, there are others that you should go and look at, but the last one that I wanted to tease out is that finishers will now consume armor charges and not dip into your super energy. For me, I actually think this is a really good quality of life update, knowing that the fact that, especially when we're thinking about in-game content and we have stuff like Lucent Finisher and we're able to finish enemies for ammo, being able to know that that only affects our armor charges, so say like our charge of light stacks versus dipping into our super energy, for me is a really good change, especially if you have special ammo finisher, which I think takes like 1/6 or like 1/3. It takes a good chunk of your super energy, right? So now that's no longer going to be the case. It's only going to dip into your armor charge itself. Again, these are just 3 that I felt personally are going to have some of the most impact to the whole player base, but definitely would encourage folks to go through and look at the other pieces. But essentially, a lot of the changes just sum up to when you're actually engaging with the game, you're building into something like Charge with Light, you actually have to think a little bit more about what system and build you're trying to put together, because ultimately it's going to have a pretty big change in the gameplay itself, because you're not just going to be able to walk around with infinite charge with light stacks. For instance, you now are going to have a cost and benefit of being able to either extend those stacks, use them up immediately, or whatever you're going to do for the specific activity that you're involved in. So a lot to think about, a lot of shifts in the gameplay, but want to go deeper on those things once we actually get to play with them in game. Finally, it's important for folks to know that elemental wells, we had a good run, but they are getting nerfed. In my opinion, it's a pretty significant nerf, so I am a little bit concerned about what this will look like when we're actually in game, because it's been so beneficial from the beginning of Warmind cells to the meta, which has been the meta for the past like year or so, year and a half, of elemental wells. Now a number of the mods, instead of creating elemental wells, are now going to create orbs of power. Orbs of power are great for other types of builds that you want to do, as well as just getting orbs of power for your super. But with the deprecation of elemental wells, it now means that there's going to be damage type specific objects, they call them objects, instead of elemental wells that are going to be spawned when you have those mods equipped. Specifically for Arc, it's going to be ionic traces. We know what those are. For Solar, it's going to be the fire sprites. We know what those are. Void, it's going to be void breaches. I think void breaches is just new language, but assuming that void breaches is the same animation that we've been seeing in game with void. Stasis shards will continue to be for stasis, and then strand, we will get more details on strand when we have it, but it would be kind of cool since strand is going to be like in the air and we're swinging around the rooms and things like that. It would be actually cool if there's like something in the air that we could, you know, jump up and grab or whatever the case is. So again, some of the big things to stand out from the mod customizations that we do have to look forward to. One, RIP Warmind cells, they are leaving the game. Unfortunately, they were some of the best things we could spawn in the game for such a long time. But again, after the nerf that happened a while ago, they just haven't been what they used to. And now they're being taken out of the game completely. In terms of mod customization, mod energy types are being removed. So again, a lot more freedom in how we're building. There are going to be different benefits that you can get to mods, but they're not going to be based on the damage type versus the archetype. And then a great quality of life update that when we're grinding the game and artifact mod gets unlocked, we'll now have them passively unlocked and we don't have to figure out where to put them in our armor slots. That in combination with all the changes we talked about with the armor charge mods, as well as the nerf to elemental wells, Bungie is really pushing us to, what they said, evolve in our build crafting, and we are going to have to think more intentionally about how we make our builds, what's going to work best for our fire teams, if we're doing stuff solo, how it's going to best work for solo, so on and so forth. While there are going to be things that are going to be more quality of life updates that are making things easier and more intuitive in the game, there's also going to be a lot of things that are going to require us to think a little bit more deeply before we just head into the game. So that's the update for this. If you haven't watched part 1, please watch part 1. This is part 2. Really excited about this. Definitely more breakdowns to come, because ultimately we have to see how this plays in game, and maybe this feels really terrible or maybe it feels really great. Who knows until Lightfall drops. But again, we're about a month or so away until Lightfall. Really excited about all that's going to come with that. I appreciate your time. If you're looking for more content like this, as well as other breakdowns, guides, walkthroughs, please like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you all next time.